The consensus read on Stanford's 2026 AI Index is that it confirms what everyone's already believed. First, capability is accelerating, productivity is landing, and the entry-level workers are basically the first casualties. That's what you get if you read that only one-page summary. However, the following 400 pages behind it says something more complicated and even tells some entirely opposite story than what the report portrays. I've pulled out 6 places where the summary makes a claim that data don't quite defend. Let's start with this one, a benchmark where AI scores 98% on one version of a question, but only 60% on the exact same question, only with a different pronoun. You'd never know these exist if you read the reports the way most would. Now, share this with someone who doesn't have the time to read the 400 pages report. Let's start with Superhuman on benchmarks, brittle in reality. There are at least dozens of benchmarks cited in this report, so if on any given day that someone quoted a few benchmarks and saying that it's already surpassed humans' capabilities, you'll be very easily to be fooled by these benchmarks in terms of what AI could achieve these days. Stanford's report put together frontier models against human baseline on these 11 benchmarks. Range from image recognition, language understanding, reading comprehension, competition math, PhD level science, multimodal reasoning, visual reasoning, and so on and so forth. Several benchmarks were below humans' baseline a few years ago, but by this year, 2026, 9 out of 11 surpassed it. That leaves only 2 holdouts, live computer use and end-to-end software engineering, though both are closing fast. These are single-step benchmarks with mostly standardized test questions. The story turns, however, when you tweak the benchmarks slightly. Here's tweak number 1. Tell the model, I believe, and it starts folding. This benchmark tests a very specific competence. Can a model distinguish between what is known and what is merely believed? Both GPT and DeepSeek correctly handle third-person false belief at north of 90%, so that's impressive. Now, if we say the same thing in the first-person claim, like I believe in X, even when X is a false statement, the GPT's correctness suddenly drops significantly to 66% with O3 Mini, while DeepSeek's models even plunge to under 30%. Many models still struggle with something that you find routine. Tell the time. Now, this benchmark, I added the website link in my article, so if you're interested to take the test as human, give it a go. It shows how our PhD level AI still struggles to read analog clocks, something you've learned in kindergarten. Reading a clock sounds simple, but it actually requires 2 separate steps. First, you have to see where the hands are, and second, you need to translate that into time. So there is the risk that an error in the first step will cascade into the next one, and exactly why AI gets it wrong. Even the top models only gets this right about as often as a coin toss. Tweak number 3, AI makes a mess of your money. Text questions really feels like something should be well within AI's comfort zone. There are rigid rules, there are numbers, and there are a single correct answer. This benchmark, called Text Eval, has built with tax and finance professionals over 1,500 questions, something you would test a tax associate during an interview. Here's an example task. Michael, a married taxpayer filing jointly, has adjusted gross income of $300,000 for 2023, excluding any investment income. Now, I want you to calculate Michael's tax liability related to his investment income and consider the net investment income tax. The correct answer here is that Michael owes $18,280 in taxes. The best models, however, were right only about 3/4 of the time. So if you ever ask AI to launder your money, it'll probably just make it dirtier. To run a household task, A robot has to do several things at once. First, it has to see the room properly, to understand the physics. For example, a full cup is going to be heavier than an empty one, or a tomato needs less grip than a tennis ball. And the ability to plan a long sequence of steps where each one depends on the last, not to mention the ability to notice when a step goes wrong in order to adjust it. So for you who have dreamed of relying on a robot for your future care home day, well, at least that's what I wanted. The good news is robots now succeeded at 89% of the time, but the bad news is that that's the data in simulation. Software environment where a virtual robot picks up a virtual cup. In actual homes, robots probably drop your cups in nearly 9 out of 10 times. In the benchmark, you will see a 12.4% of success rate from the most advanced model. Just an FYI, the biggest constraint in improving robots' ability in real world is data. Language models has trained on billions of pages of text from the internet, whereas every piece of robot training data requires either a physical robot performing a task or high-fidelity simulation, both of which are slow and expensive. Once you realize how scarce robot training data is, this viral video from an Indian factory makes so much more sense, where the workers were asked to wear a head-mounted camera to record how they do the job, which brings us to the next question the summary gets wrong. If the capability is this brittle, is there actually any productivity shows up anywhere? Productivity, strong in studies, weak in real economy. Over the past 2 years, researchers and companies have been trying to find out what AI has actually achieved. Level 1, task and individual level. Here are 5 out of 7 task-based studies showed really encouraging changes. For instance, one study gave 5,000 customer support agents AI reply suggestions while they were handling customer issues. They have found these customer supports have resolved 14% more tickets per hour, with the biggest gains, 34%, going to the agents who just onboarded with the company. Or another study found that 5,000 developers across Microsoft and Accenture completed 26% more pull requests per week. Though here's a caveat, I've reviewed this paper in 2025. It comes with many catches. Anyways, here's the link to the article. If you stop at the task level, the result looks pretty good. Now, the question is, did any of these turn into real money? A survey cited by the Stanford report of nearly 6,000 CEOs and CFOs across US, UK, Germany, and Australia were asked this question. Has AI changed anything at your company over the past 3 years? Almost 9 in 10 said AI had not moved productivity at all. Across the full sample, the average gain was 0.29%. Another study here looked at 12,000 European firms. They have found AI adoption raised output per worker by 4% on average. But of course, this number came with some conditions. It concentrated almost entirely in medium and large firms. And the boost only showed up when firms also invest in training alongside the AI. Without that, the effect almost disappears. So the gains seem to depend less on the tool itself than what the firm do around it. Now, let's zoom out further to the country level. US private AI investment has reached $285 billion in 2025. The same year, US productivity has also grew 2.7%, nearly double the average of the previous decade. Then that makes the whole thing sound like an AI win, isn't it? But when you follow the thread of what Penn Wharton trying to work out of how much this 2.7% was actually AI, you will realize there's only 0.01% are actually from AI, a number that is nearly negligible. In their own word, as most businesses have yet to deploy and gain experience with AI tools. And of course, at this point, an economist is almost obliged to step out and say something else. One thinks we are just in this early dip of a J-curve, i.e. the aggressive uptake in benefits from AI. In firms, they are still paying the setup cost of AI, buying it, integrating it, or retraining people for it. And the real gains will show up later. Just as electricity took 30 years to show up in the number, or PC took around 20 years. And here are also some other theories on AI's impact on the economy from the last few years. This economist might be right, but at this moment, just no one can really confidently contribute any of the productivity growth to AI. So what we have is at the task level, productivity gains are somewhat real. At the firm level, 89% of the executives say nothing has changed. And at the economy level, neither Penn Wharton or even Goldman Sachs can yet find much AI in the number. This gap between what AI does for an individual in the study and what it does for an economy is right now enormous. So yes, you might have seen a developer with Copilot write a pull request faster, or a founder vibe coded all his products, but none of those translates to the return on all the resources that we have poured into AI, which makes this next number in the report even harder to explain. A 20% collapse in junior hiring that everyone has already decided is AI's fault. Job market. AI still gets blamed for junior hiring. It all started with a paper called Canaries in a Coal Mine by students in the Stanford's Digital Economy Lab. The thesis is based on the 2025 US payroll data. They focused on two jobs widely seen as exposed to AI. One, software developers, and second, customer service agents. And then they tracked headcount by age group from 2021 to 25. For a while, all age groups track together. And then, as you can see in this image, the youngest cohort breaks lower. By 2025, it is down nearly 20% from its high. They then expanded the analysis to more occupations and grouped them by AI exposure. The headline result was a 16% of relative decline in employment for the youngest in the most exposed jobs. And that's the figure you've now seen everywhere. However, this is also where this neat AI took the juniors story begins to fall apart. Start with how these exact authors walking back some of their claims. In February 2026, they published a follow-up note called Canaries, Interest Rates, and Timing. Their own finding here says once you applied the broadest control, the employment decline only becomes statistically significant in 2024. The earlier drops are likely due to a combination of factors. Well, they didn't spell it out like this, but they were basically saying, sorry, we were wrong. Then a team at Google and the Economic Innovation Group ran the exact same exercise on more than 200 million job postings, and they found the postings for AI-exposed roles peaked in spring 2022, and that was 6 months before ChatGPT even shipped. But that was the time precisely when Fed has started its sharpest rate hike cycle in 40 years. The Google team found no junior-specific collapse. Junior and senior postings fell together. In their data, the AI came for the junior story simply does not show up. I've made a similar argument in an earlier piece by looking at the longer historical pattern in hiring and interest rate, which was later on also cited in Forbes. Here's the link to check it out. But simply, the junior jobs AI horror story just doesn't hold up. If you still don't think the evidence is enough, here's one from the Federal Reserve directly. They've matched consensus survey data with 7 million observations of firms' hiring behavior over time, examining effects at 1, 3, 6, and 12 months. If AI adoption were already causing firms to pull back on hiring, this is where you would expect to see it. They found, however, no such effect. Here's their own word. We find that thus far, there is no evidence of a reduction in job posting for industries or firms which have higher levels of AI adoptions. So what are we left with? The 20% drop in the chart is real. Young software developers and customer support agents are being hired less or fired more, or both. But the downturn begins before AI can credibly be blamed for it. So the junior story is really a distraction. Here's what the report doesn't flag as clearly. Here are 3 places where the US AI position is actually fragile. Talent pipeline, the cost of staying ahead, and Taiwan. Crack number 1, how the US chose its own AI talent supply. So 2/3 of the people being trained to build AI in the US are actually not Americans. It is based on the 2024 enrollment data. Among US graduates of AI software-related master degrees, 2 out of 3 are non-residents. Here's what this Stanford report has noted. This is consistent with the prior years, and here's what they also added. They say the majority of AI-related graduate students are non-United States residents, a pattern consistent with previous years. Due to federal government revoking student visas and discouraging international student enrollment, further decline in numbers of non-resident graduates are expected in the coming years. Yes, the United States says it really wants the AI leadership, while for some reason undermining the pipeline that supplies it. One of Trump's 2025 AI orders talks about American leadership, but says nothing about immigration or student visas, and even revoked Biden's earlier order to streamline visas for AI researchers. By early 2026, this administration had revoked more than 100,000 non-immigrant visas, including about 8,000 of student visas. So if 2/3 of your AI graduate pipeline runs through people on visa that you're now canceling, either you have a plan to replace them or the pipeline just runs dry. Crack number 2, the cost of staying ahead. On private AI investment, the US outspent China 23-1 in 2025. That's $285 billion versus $12 billion. On its own, the number looks decisive. However, if you put it next to the benchmark gap, it started to look expensive. So this is our first flip. When you pair the private spending with the benchmark comparing the top US model versus the top Chinese model, this private investment number tells you how inefficient US dollar actually are, because the performance of top models is really close. There's now as little as 2.7% differences between them. So until now, you have spent 23 times as much money to get only 2.7% better in AI. Here's our second flip though, something the report didn't specify. The $285 billion and the $12 billion count private still, but it misses the fact that, as you would guess, China has invested much more state money in AI. So around the same period of time, you have China put in $138 billion of national state VC fund with AI and cutting-edge technology as their named priorities. US also committed around $5 billion. Keep in mind that this doesn't include that $500 billion of the Stargate project. And now, if we put the state and the private numbers together, the picture changes. So in 2025, you have China, that's private plus state, have invested around $150 billion. You have US, that's again also private plus state, have invested nearly $300 billion. However you count it, China closed the model gap within 2 years with less money and limited access to NVIDIA's best AI chips. The deepest vulnerability is neither talent nor money. It's geography. Here's Stanford's own phrase for TSMC, the Taiwanese foundry that fabricates nearly every leading AI chips. A single point of dependency in the global AI supply chain. That includes NVIDIA's Blackwell GPUs and AMD's MI300X. Don't worry if you don't recognize those. Basically, they are the most advanced AI chips. Here's also what NVIDIA puts in their latest 10K report. They stated, our business depends on our ability to receive consistent and reliable supply from our overseas partners, especially in Taiwan. Now, it's already dangerous to have only one supplier for your really key ingredient. But hey, why do we let this drama stop here? To add a cherry on top, Taiwan is geographically and historically close to China, and Beijing still claims the island as its own territory. Military drills around Taiwan has escalated every year since 2022. No, actually, they have always been there. Even when I was born, air defense drills was always part of our school lessons. If those drills will ever become blockade, TSMC stops fabricating for anyone else but China. Yes, you do have TSMC Arizona Fab 1 that has now reached 4nm production, but it'd only be impressive if you were still in 2020, but no. We are in 2026, aren't we? Especially when TSMC announced its 2nm process has already begun volume production in Taiwan in late 2025. US chip making is improving, but the frontier is still moving faster in Taiwan. A multi-trillion-dollar AI industry runs through one company on one island. Now, forget the experts. What do your neighbors think of AI? This index also reports a 50% gap between what AI experts and original people believe the future of work. Let's rewind for a bit. There is one full chapter in this Stanford report dedicated to comparing experts' opinion and the real public's beliefs about AI. So before we get to the data, here's one paragraph run from me. Pew Research, whose survey Stanford relies on, defined an AI expert as anyone who authored or presented at one of the 21 AI-related conferences. However, you need to realize 7 of those 21 conferences are commercial trade shows or vendor events. The business model of those events is sponsorships and ticket sales to enterprise buying AI. But Stanford has decided to print the headline anyway. So when the report tells you experts are 50 points more optimistic than the publics about AI and jobs, remember that some of those experts are AI salesmen. Now, strip out the experts. Here's what people actually think AI will do to or for them. They think it will take their jobs. By a ratio of roughly 13:1, they expect fewer jobs in the next 20 years, not more. Also, the majority don't think it'll help with the economy, nor will it make them better at their work. On top of these, it's also actively bad for your relationships. So far, probably also really predictable to you that most experts in Stanford's charts disagreed on nearly all fronts, but they think AI will bring a bigger economy, better jobs. You know the drill. There's only one chart where the experts finally stop disagreeing. This is the one that asks what AI does to human minds, which include mental well-being, social, and your very ability to think analytically. Across the board, a majority expect things to get worse by 2025. Not as loudly, but the same direction that half of them also expect social intelligence to decline. This makes the one point on which the AI industry and the general public finally agree, whether the technology being built is bad for the humans using it. That's the finding the summary didn't print. Stanford's index is valuable for its thoroughness. It rounds up a full year of AI research into one place, but it's still a collection of other people's studies, not the studies themselves. So when most people cite this index, they're citing a summary of a summary. Remember, in a telephone game, it's inevitable that information accuracy just decreases throughout time. And I've watched enough of those get quoted in meetings or on LinkedIn to sense how these are often horribly misused. And this is the gaps that matters, benchmarks that collapse when you change a pronoun. The productivity gains that are in no one's quarterly report. In Junior Labor Market Story, the author themselves are walking back. A country that spent half the money without the best chips and closed the gap anyway. And we are at 100 miles per hour speed to peak this technology, which users don't think is good for them. None of this implies AI isn't real, but simply the story, the true story about AI is quieter than the data behind it. I couldn't cover everything here, but if you skim nothing else, just skim the figures. They're far more revealing than the summary. And this is only one episode of my AI series, Big Claim, Small Print. If you're interested in these kind of report analysis, make sure you continue with this watch list. See you next time.